The thundering of hooves echoed through the valley as Elijah Samuels raced against the setting sun, his heart pounding harder than his stallion's galloping feet. The year was 1876, and the untamed Wyoming Territory stretched before him like an endless canvas of possibilities and perils. Behind him, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, promising a storm that would soon turn the docile Sweetwater River into a raging beast. "Come on, Thunder, faster," Elijah urged his chestnut stallion, leaning forward in the saddle. His thoughts were with Lucas, his loyal border collie and best friend of 8 years, who had wandered off during their cattle drive. The loyal dog had been at his side through everything: gunfights with rustlers, brutal winters, and lonely nights under the stars. As Elijah approached the river, he spotted a slender figure standing on the far bank, her blue dress billowing in the wind. Lily Valentine. The schoolteacher who'd arrived in Sweetwater Junction just 6 months ago, bringing books, education, and a smile that made even the hardest cowboys trip over their words. "Elijah," Lily called out, waving frantically. "Over here. I saw Lucas cross the river about an hour ago." Elijah reined Thunder to a halt at the river's edge, tipping his worn leather hat. "Which way did he go, Lily? Upstream? He was chasing after something, a rabbit, I think. I tried calling him, but he wouldn't come." Her voice carried across the water, tinged with concern. The first drops of rain began to fall as Elijah guided Thunder along the bank, scanning the opposite shore for any sign of his beloved dog. The river was already swelling, churning with brown, angry water from the mountains. "I'll help you look," Lily called, hiking up her skirts and following along her side of the river. Thunder suddenly reared, nearly throwing Elijah from the saddle. A crack of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening boom of thunder. The rain was falling in sheets now, and the river was rising by the minute. "Lily, get to higher ground," Elijah shouted above the storm. "This river's gonna flood. I'm not leaving until we find Lucas," she called back stubbornly, her auburn hair now plastered to her face from the rain. That was Lily Valentine, stubborn as a mule and brave as any man Elijah had ever known. Since arriving from Boston to teach the children of ranchers, miners, and townsfolk, she'd faced down skepticism and hardship with a determined smile. Elijah had first met her when he delivered lumber for the schoolhouse, and he'd been stealing glances at her ever since. A desperate bark pierced through the storm's roar. "Lucas," Elijah shouted, spotting his dog stranded on a small island of rock in the middle of the now raging river. The border collie's black and white coat was soaked, his eyes wide with fear as water crashed around him. Without hesitation, Elijah dismounted and removed his gun belt and boots. "Stay, Thunder," he commanded, then dove into the churning waters. "Elijah, no." Lily screamed, watching in horror as the powerful current immediately swept him downstream. Elijah fought against the river with powerful strokes, but the current was merciless. He managed to angle himself toward the rock where Lucas was trapped, reaching out as he was swept past. His fingers grazed Lucas's wet fur, and for a moment their eyes met loyal dog and desperate master. "I'm coming back for you, boy," Elijah shouted, but the river had him now, tumbling him like a rag doll through the rapids. Lily raced along the bank, keeping pace with Elijah's bobbing form. "Grab something, anything," she called out. She'd lost too many people in her 23 years of life, her parents to influenza back east, her brother in the war between the states. She wouldn't lose Elijah too, this quiet cowboy who left wildflowers on the schoolhouse steps when he thought no one was looking. Elijah managed to grab a low-hanging branch, pulling himself toward shore with the last of his strength. Lily was there in an instant, helping drag his waterlogged body onto the muddy bank. "Lucas," he gasped between coughs, water streaming from his clothes. "He's still out there. You can't go back in," Lily insisted, her green eyes fierce with determination. "You'll drown." A desperate howl cut through the storm, and they both turned to see Lucas still clinging to the rock, which was now barely visible above the rising water. "I have to try," Elijah said, struggling to his feet. Just then, a terrible crack split the air as a massive tree, uprooted by the flood, came hurtling down the river. Elijah and Lily watched in horror as it slammed into Lucas's rocky refuge. "Lucas!" Elijah's anguished cry tore from his throat as the dog disappeared beneath the raging waters. He lunged toward the river again, but Lily wrapped her arms around him, using all her strength to hold him back. "He's gone, Elijah. You can't save him now." Rain mingled with tears on Elijah's face as he sank to his knees in the mud. Lucas was more than a dog. He was family, the only constant in Elijah's life since he'd left his family's Tennessee farm at 16 to seek his fortune in the West. "I can't leave him," Elijah whispered. "And I can't leave you," Lily replied, her voice soft but firm. "Night's coming. We need shelter." With the river between them and town, they took shelter in an abandoned trapper's cabin that Elijah knew was nearby. As darkness fell, they built a small fire with what dry wood they could find. Elijah sat silently, staring into the flames, his clothes still damp, his heart hollow with grief. "Lucas found me, you know," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't find him. I was working as a ranch hand in Colorado, and this half-starved pup just showed up one day. Followed me everywhere. Best cattle dog anyone ever saw once I got some meat on his bones." Lily wrapped a threadbare blanket around his shoulders. "Tell me more about him." And so Elijah did, through the long night as the storm raged outside. He told her how Lucas would curl up at the foot of his bedroll on cold nights, how the dog had once chased off a mountain lion that had been stalking their camp, how he seemed to understand every word Elijah said. With each story, Lily saw deeper into the soul of this quiet cowboy, recognizing a gentle heart beneath the rough exterior. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but the river was still a churning monster, carrying debris and the remnants of lives disrupted by its fury. Elijah stood at the door of the cabin, his face set in grim determination. "I need to look for him," he said simply. "I know," Lily replied. "I'll help." They spent the day searching the riverbanks downstream, hoping against hope that Lucas had somehow survived, had managed to swim to shore. But as the sun began to set on their second day away from town, they had found nothing. "We should head back to town tomorrow," Lily suggested gently. "People will be worried about us." Elijah nodded, his face haggard with grief and exhaustion. "You should go back. I need to keep looking." "I'm not leaving you alone," she insisted, her chin lifted in that stubborn way that had both charmed and exasperated the town since her arrival. "Why?" Elijah demanded, his voice sharp with pain. "Why do you care so much what happens to me or my dog?" Lily's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "Because good people are hard to find in this world, Elijah Samuels, and you're one of the best I've known." Something shifted in Elijah's eyes then, a softening amid the grief. But before he could respond, a distant bark echoed across the valley. They both froze, afraid to hope. "Lucas." Elijah whispered, then louder. "Lucas." Another bark, faint but unmistakable. They ran toward the sound, scrambling over fallen trees and debris left by the flood. As they rounded a bend in the river, they saw him, a bedraggled, mud-caked border collie limping along the far bank of the river, still a quarter-mile downstream where the river widened and grew calmer. "Lucas," Elijah shouted, joy erupting from him like a geyser. The dog's head shot up, ears perked. With a joyful bark, he tried to run toward them but stumbled, clearly injured. "He can't swim across," Lily said, watching the dog struggle to move. "Not with that leg." "Then I'll go to him," Elijah decided, looking for a place to cross. "The river's still too dangerous here," Lily warned. "We need to find a ford, somewhere the water's calmer." "That could be miles away, and it's getting dark," Elijah argued. "I'm not leaving him alone another night." Lily grabbed his arm. "And I'm not letting you drown. We'll camp here tonight where he can see us. Tomorrow we'll find a way across together." Her touch and the fierce concern in her eyes stopped Elijah's argument in his throat. He nodded slowly. "Lucas," he called across the water. "Stay, boy, stay there." The dog whined but settled down on the bank, his loyal eyes fixed on his master. That night, they camped within sight of Lucas, keeping a fire burning bright so the dog wouldn't feel abandoned. Under a sky filled with stars, Lily and Elijah talked for the first time. "Why did you come west?" Elijah asked her as they shared the last of their jerky. "An educated lady like you could have stayed in Boston, had a comfortable life." Lily smiled, the firelight dancing across her face. I wanted to make a difference. After losing my family, there was nothing holding me there. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher needed in Wyoming Territory, it felt like an adventure, a purpose. Aren't you afraid out here? It's not exactly Boston. Of course I'm afraid sometimes, she admitted. But fear doesn't have to stop you from living, from doing what matters. She looked at him curiously. What about you? What brought you west? Elijah poked at the fire with a stick. Same as most men, I reckon, looking for something, freedom maybe. My father wanted me to take over the family farm, but I needed to find my own way. And have you found your way? He looked across the river where Lucas lay watching them, then back at Lily, her question hanging in the air between them. I'm not sure yet, but I think I'm getting closer. As dawn broke, they began moving downstream, keeping Lucas in sight on the opposite bank. The dog followed them, limping but determined. They hiked for miles before finding a place where the river widened and slowed, making crossing possible. Wait here, Elijah told Lily. I'll cross first, then come back for you. Be careful, she said, her hand lingering on his arm. The water was still high and cold, but Elijah was a strong swimmer. He made it across and raced to Lucas, who greeted him with whimpers of joy and frantic licks to his face. Elijah buried his face in the dog's wet fur, overcome with emotion. I thought I lost you, boy, he whispered, after checking Lucas's injuries, a badly cut paw and some scrapes, but nothing life-threatening. Elijah crossed back to fetch Lily. The current was stronger than he expected, and halfway across he felt himself being pulled downstream. Elijah, Lily called out in alarm. Stay there, he shouted, fighting the current, but Lily Valentine had never been one to stand by when someone needed help. She waded in, carrying a long branch. Grab hold. Together, they fought against the river that had nearly claimed 2 lives and made it to the bank where Lucas waited anxiously. Exhausted and drenched, they collapsed on the shore, laughing with the simple joy of being alive. Guess we're even now, Elijah said, catching his breath. You saved me, I saved you. I believe Lucas deserves most of the credit for surviving on his own, Lily replied, scratching the dog's ears. They made a makeshift splint for Lucas's injured paw using strips from Lily's petticoat and branches, then began the long walk back to town. It would take them another full day, traveling slowly for Lucas's sake. That night, they made camp in a small grove of cottonwood trees. The temperature dropped sharply after sunset, and they huddled close to the fire, Lucas curled up between them. You don't have to stay out here, you know, Elijah said, noticing Lily shiver despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Town's not that far now. You could make it before full dark if you wanted, Lily shook her head. I told you I'm not leaving until you both come home. Home, the word hung in the air between them. Elijah had never really had a home, not since leaving Tennessee. He'd had jobs, places he stayed, but not a home. Why did you come looking for Lucas with me? He asked, the question that had been nagging at him since they started this journey. Lily stared into the fire for a long moment. Because I've seen how you look at him, like he's the only family you have, and because. She hesitated, then lifted her eyes to his. Because I've seen how you look at me sometimes, too. Elijah felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. And how's that? Like maybe you could care for me if you let yourself. The crackling of the fire filled the silence between them as Elijah struggled to find words. He'd never been good at talking about feelings, had always let his actions speak instead. I do care, he finally said, his voice rough. More than I should, probably. You're educated, respectable. I'm just a cowhand with dirt under his nails and not much to offer. You offered to risk your life for your best friend, Lily said softly. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man you are, Elijah Samuels. In the firelight, with Lucas sleeping peacefully beside them, Elijah found the courage to reach across the space between them and take Lily's hand. Her fingers curled around his, warm and sure. When we get back to town, he said, would you let me call on you properly? Take you to dinner at the hotel. Lily's smile was brighter than the stars overhead. I'd like that very much. They returned to Sweetwater Junction the next day. A curious sight, the schoolteacher in her muddy, torn dress, the cowboy with 3 days' growth of beard, and the limping border collie between them. Word of their adventure spread quickly through the small town. Over the following weeks, as spring bloomed across the valley, Elijah called on Lily just as he'd promised. Their courtship became the talk of Sweetwater Junction, the quiet cowboy, and the schoolteacher from back east. Lucas, recovering from his injuries, became a regular fixture at the schoolhouse, lying under Lily's desk while she taught, much to the delight of her students. Elijah took work at the Circle S Ranch just outside of town, breaking horses and managing cattle drives. It wasn't the wandering life he'd known before, but with each passing day, the pull to stay grew stronger. In the evenings, he would ride to the schoolhouse where Lily often worked late, grading papers or preparing lessons. Sometimes they would walk along the now peaceful river, Lucas trotting ahead of them. One such evening in late summer, as golden light bathed the valley, Elijah led Lily to a spot overlooking the river where wildflowers painted the hillside in vibrant colors. "I've been thinking," he said, uncharacteristically nervous, "about finding my way like we talked about that night by the river." "And have you?" Lily asked, echoing her question from months before. Elijah took her hands in his. "I think my way is with you if you'll have me." "I love you, Lily Valentine. Will you marry me?" Tears shone in Lily's green eyes as she smiled up at him. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Lucas, sensing the importance of the moment, pressed against their legs, his tail wagging furiously. They were married in the autumn of 1876, in a ceremony attended by the entire town. Lily wore a dress of ivory silk ordered from Denver, with wildflowers in her hair. Elijah wore a new suit that still couldn't quite disguise the cowboy beneath. Lucas, wearing a special collar Lily had made, carried the rings tied to a small pouch around his neck. After the wedding, Elijah surprised Lily by taking her to a small cabin he'd built on a piece of land he'd purchased along the river, not far from town so she could still teach. It was simple but sturdy, with a front porch facing the mountains and a special place by the hearth for Lucas's bed. "It's perfect," Lily whispered, taking in the home he'd created for them. "It's just a start," Elijah said. "I plan to add on, maybe plant an orchard come spring." "I don't need fancy things, Elijah. Just you and our life together." As winter descended on Wyoming Territory, they settled into their new life. The cabin was warm with love and laughter, even when snow piled high outside the windows. Elijah continued working at the ranch, while Lily taught at the schoolhouse. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Lily often reading aloud from one of her books while Elijah carved wood or mended tack. Lucas would lie between them, content in the presence of the two humans he loved most. Their life wasn't without challenges. The winter of 76 into 77 was brutal, with blizzards that isolated them for weeks. In January, Lucas fell ill with a fever that left him weak and listless. Elijah and Lily took turns sitting up with him through the nights, keeping warm compresses on his body and coaxing him to drink. "You can't leave us now, old friend," Elijah whispered to the dog one night when he thought Lily was asleep. "We've come too far together." "He's strong," Lily said, placing her hand on Elijah's shoulder, "like his master." After 5 anxious days, Lucas's fever broke, and he slowly returned to health. The relief Elijah felt was visible in every line of his body, and Lily understood more than ever the depth of the bond between man and dog. Spring brought new beginnings. The land around their cabin burst into life, and Lily discovered she was with child. When she told Elijah, his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he said in wonder, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Lucas sensed the change in Lily before anyone else noticed. He became her constant shadow, refusing to leave her side even to follow Elijah to work. Instead, he would escort her to the schoolhouse each morning, then lie patiently outside until the children were dismissed, before walking her home again. "He's appointed himself my guardian," Lily laughed one evening as Lucas settled at her feet. "Smart dog," Elijah said with a grin, "taking care of the most precious things in my life." As Lily's pregnancy progressed, Elijah added a nursery to their cabin, carefully crafting a cradle from pine with his own hands. Lucas would watch him work, his head tilted curiously as if trying to understand this new project. "This is for the baby, Lucas," Elijah explained as he sanded the wood smooth. "You'll have to help us look after him or her, just like you look after Lily." The dog's tail thumped against the floor in what seemed like agreement. In the winter of 1877, Lily gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose Samuels. She had Lily's auburn hair and Elijah's blue eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she held both their hearts in her tiny hands. Lucas approached his new charge with gentle curiosity, sniffing the bundle in Lily's arms with great care. When Emma was placed in her cradle for the first time, Lucas stationed himself beside it, his vigilance unwavering. "He thinks she's his puppy," Lily observed with a smile. "In a way, I reckon she is," Elijah replied, watching his dog guard his daughter with the same loyalty he'd always shown. As Emma grew from infant to toddler, Lucas became her constant companion and protector. He would patiently endure her clumsy pats and tugs at his fur, never showing anything but devotion. When she took her first steps, it was toward Lucas, her chubby hands reaching for his shaggy coat as he stood perfectly still, allowing her to use him for balance. "Best babysitter we could ask for," Elijah often said, watching the pair together. Life settled into a sweet rhythm for the Samuels family. Elijah's work at the ranch had earned him a reputation as one of the best horsemen in the territory, and he was promoted to foreman. Lily continued teaching, often bringing Emma to the schoolhouse with her. Their little cabin expanded to include a second bedroom, a larger kitchen, and the orchard Elijah had promised. Lucas, now showing signs of age with gray around his muzzle, still herded the occasional stray cow but spent most of his days keeping watch over his family. In the spring of 1880, when Emma was 3, Lily discovered she was expecting their second child. The news brought joy to their home, but also came with complications. This pregnancy was harder than the first, and the doctor in town advised Lily to rest as much as possible. Elijah worried constantly, taking on extra work to hire help for Lily with the household chores and care for Emma. Lucas seemed to sense the tension, rarely leaving Lily's side during the difficult days. On a crisp October morning, while Elijah was away on a cattle drive, Lily went into labor 2 weeks earlier than expected. Emma, now an observant little girl of nearly 4, knew something was wrong when her mother doubled over in pain. "Mama hurt," she said to Lucas, her small face creased with worry. The old dog sprang into action with surprising vigor for his 11 years. He herded Emma to the neighbor's house a quarter-mile away, barking frantically until someone came to the door. Then he led Mrs. Peterson back to the cabin where Lily was in labor. "That dog saved both their lives," Mrs. Peterson would later tell Elijah. "Got help just in time." By the time Elijah returned from the cattle drive, racing home after receiving word, Lily had given birth to a healthy son they named James Lucas Samuels, honoring both Lily's father and the loyal dog who had ensured their safe delivery. "You're a hero, old friend," Elijah told Lucas that night, as the family gathered around the fire, the newborn sleeping peacefully in Lily's arms and Emma curled up against her father's side. Lucas thumped his tail once in acknowledgement, his aging eyes still bright with intelligence and love. Life continued its sweet course for the Samuels family. Their home expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and Elijah's reputation as a horseman spread throughout the territory. Lily's schoolhouse flourished under her care, and she even began teaching adult education classes in the evenings for those who'd never had the chance to learn to read. Lucas grew older, his muzzle now completely white, his steps slower but his devotion unwavering. He still followed the children everywhere, though now he watched their antics from the porch steps rather than participating in their games. In the spring of 1883, when Lucas was 14 ancient for a working dog, he began to slow down considerably. His hearing faded, and his once keen eyes grew cloudy. But he still greeted Elijah each evening with a wag of his tail, still checked on the children before settling down for the night. One morning in early summer, Elijah found Lucas lying on the porch, unable to rise. His faithful companion looked up at him with eyes that were tired but still full of love. "It's all right, old friend," Elijah whispered, sitting beside the dog and gently stroking his gray head. "You've earned your rest." Lily brought water in a shallow bowl, holding it so Lucas could drink. Emma, now 6 and understanding what was happening, sat quietly beside her father, her small hand on Lucas's paw. 5-year-old James leaned against his mother, watching with solemn eyes. "Is Lucas going to heaven, Papa?" Emma asked, her voice small. "I reckon he is, sweetheart," Elijah answered, his voice thick with emotion. "And I reckon they've been saving a special place for him for all the good he's done here." The family spent the day on the porch with Lucas, taking turns sitting with him, telling him what a good dog he was, how much they loved him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Lucas took one last deep breath, looking up at Elijah with eyes full of peace, and then was gone. They buried him beneath the apple tree in the orchard, the first tree Elijah had planted when they made this place their home. Elijah carved a marker that reads simply, "Lucas, faithful friend, 1869–1883. That night, after the children were asleep, Elijah sat alone on the porch steps, looking out at the stars. Lily joined him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "He had a good life," she said softly. 14 years is a long time for a dog, especially one who worked as hard as he did. "It doesn't feel long enough," Elijah replied, his voice rough with grief. "If it hadn't been for him, I might never have found you, never had all this." He gestured to their home, the land they'd built together. "Then we'll honor him by enjoying every moment of the life he helped create," Lily said, resting her head on his shoulder. "And by telling his stories to the children, so they'll remember." In the weeks that followed, the absence of Lucas was felt deeply by the entire family. James would look for him each morning, forgetting momentarily that he was gone. Emma would save bits of her breakfast for him, then remember with a small, sad sigh. Elijah found himself turning to speak to the dog who had been his constant companion for so many years, only to face empty space. But life continued as it must. That fall, Elijah was offered a partnership in the Circle S ranch where he'd worked for years. It was an opportunity that would secure their family's future, give their children land and legacy. After much discussion with Lily, he accepted. As part of the partnership, they moved to a larger house closer to the main ranch, though they kept their original cabin by the river as a special retreat. Their new home had room for the children to grow, for Lily to host her reading circles, for Elijah to expand his work with horses. In the spring of 1884, almost a year after Lucas's passing, something unexpected happened. Elijah was checking fence lines along the river when he heard a faint whimpering coming from beneath a fallen log. Investigating, he found 3 puppies, no more than a few weeks old, apparently abandoned. "Poor little things," he murmured, gathering them up in his hat. They were border collies, or mostly so black and white like Lucas had been, with the same intelligent eyes. He brought them home to Lily and the children, who immediately fell in love with the squirming bundles. "Can we keep them, Papa, please?" Emma begged, already cradling one of the puppies. Elijah looked to Lily, who smiled and nodded. "I think this house has been too quiet without a dog," she said. They named the puppies Star, Shadow, and Hope. As they grew, each developed a distinct personality. Star was the leader, always first to investigate new things. Shadow was quiet and watchful, sticking close to the children. Hope was playful and affectionate, often found curled up in Lily's lap while she read. By summer's end, the puppies had grown into young dogs, already showing promise as cattle dogs. Elijah trained them as Lucas had trained himself, with patience and kindness. They weren't Lucas, no dog could ever replace him, but they brought new joy to the family. And in their antics, sometimes Elijah caught glimpses of his old friend. One evening in early autumn, as the family sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Emma suddenly pointed toward the river. "Look, Papa, look at the river bank." They all turned to look where she was pointing. There, in the golden light of sunset, a figure seemed to stand on the far bank, the silhouette of a border collie, proud and alert, watching over them. "Lucas," James whispered, his eyes wide. The vision, if that's what it was, lasted only a moment before fading into the gathering dusk. but it left behind a sense of peace, of completion. "Do you think it was really him?" Lily asked later that night as she and Elijah prepared for bed. Elijah thought about it for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally said. "Maybe it was just the light playing tricks, or maybe," he smiled, remembering his faithful companion. "Maybe he just wanted to check on us, make sure we were all right." "We are all right, aren't we?" Lily said, taking his hand. Elijah looked at his wife, thinking of all they had built together since that fateful day when a storm and a river had nearly taken everything from him. Instead, it had given him everything: a home, a family, a life filled with love. "We're more than all right," he said, pulling her close. "We're blessed." In the years that followed, the Samuels family continued to thrive. Elijah's partnership in the ranch brought prosperity, allowing him to expand their holdings and establish a breeding program for quality horses. Lily's dedication to education led to the building of a proper schoolhouse in town, where she served as headmistress. Emma grew into a thoughtful young woman with her mother's love of books and her father's affinity for horses. James became known for his skill with animals, especially dogs, training the finest herding dogs in the territory. The 3 puppies Elijah had rescued grew into exceptional working dogs, each with their own role on the ranch and in the family. When visitors came to the Samuels ranch, they would often hear the story of Lucas, the border collie who had been lost to the river and miraculously returned, of how Lily had waited faithfully on the bank until Elijah came home, of how that moment had been the beginning of everything good in their lives. And sometimes, in the golden light of sunset, when the family gathered on their porch after a day's work, they would look toward the river and remember. For it was there, on the banks of the Sweetwater, that they had found not just each other, but the true meaning of love, loyalty, and home. In the autumn of 1896, 20 years after Elijah had nearly lost everything to the river, he and Lily celebrated their anniversary by returning to their original cabin. It was still maintained, a beloved retreat from the busier life of the main ranch. Their children were grown now, Emma engaged to the son of a neighboring rancher, James studying veterinary medicine in Denver. As they walked along the riverbank, arm in arm, Elijah paused at the spot where he had pulled himself from the water that fateful day, where Lily had prevented him from plunging back into the current after Lucas disappeared. "I never properly thanked you," he said, turning to face his wife, whose beauty had only deepened with the passing years. "For what?" Lily asked, her green eyes curious. "For waiting. For believing we'd both come home." Lily smiled, touching his weathered cheek with gentle fingers. "I would have waited forever," she said simply. "Some things are worth waiting for." And as the sun set over the Sweetwater Valley, painting the river gold, they both thought they saw, just for a moment, the silhouette of a border collie watching over them from the opposite bank, a faithful friend who had led them to each other, and to a life filled with more love than either could have imagined.